What's up everyone, Aaron from Unison here. Something I struggled with for a long time when I first started out making music was transitioning from one section to the next. So say I have an A section and I want to transition over to the B section, but right now it just sounds a bit jarring. Well, using transition sections or effects can help your track to transition smoothly from one part to the next. By the way, if you don't know what A and B sections are, I did a more in-depth video that covers that. You can check it out here. Anyways, we're going to be going over 6 different methods that will help your transitions to stand out, but also to help your track flow smoothly and to keep that momentum going within the song. To break it down, we're going to be going over using downlifters, risers, impacts, things like that. We're going to be using fills such as synth fills, vocal fills, and also drum fills. Also learning how to use silence effectively, as well as cutting out certain sections to allow for these transition sections to have room to breathe. Learning how to use automation such as EQ, reverb, filtering, volume gain, all that good stuff to help your track feel like it's naturally flowing. We're going to be talking about reversing elements to introduce them into the next section as kind of a segue. And then a special bonus tip at the end is using fakeouts on the downbeat to kind of give a bit more of an impact when the song does come back in. Again, kind of leans back into effective use of silence. All right, so let's go ahead and jump into Ableton and we'll get started. All right, so in this example here, I have implemented each of the 6 tricks that I've mentioned previously. So we'll start with number 1, which is risers, downlifters, impacts, etc. And so at the very beginning here, we have this kind of soft, very subtle kind of sound with some reverb on it. Just a kind of a soft impact to intro the song itself. And then over here we have this quick kind of like suck back effect, kind of just like draw you into the next section by using it just like sucks you in kinda. I think that's why they call it a suck back. So we have that suck back effect that takes us into this little snare fill here, which we'll get into later, but this just kind of helps to push the track along. Without it, it just kind of shows up. It's not like easing into it. And so by using these little suck back effects or just like small little transition effects like this, it can help to intro these elements better instead of them just showing up on your doorstep. And again, this one isn't necessarily covered in this topic, but it is a nice attention to detail, if you will, by adding this here, which is just a reversed kick. So all I did was I took this kick sample here, reversed it, turned down the volume a little bit, as you can see here, and it just made for a nice kind of like introing the kick instead of it just showing up. And then here in the build, we have this more reverbed out sound again. And then there's this alarm sound that I added as well. And just added some delay and reverb to it. And so all together. And then here in the build, we have this riser effect. It's kind of alluring to this more energetic section that's about to happen. And then it all just cuts back. So there's the riser. And then in contrast, bada bing, bada boom. And then over here, let's see. I think it's just the same thing as well. It's nice to also throw it in your actual drop too. So we have this same effect again, but instead of using the little suck back effect that I used here to go into the fill, I use this riser to kind of signal the end of the drop is coming. So by doing that, it just adds energy to your drop or whatever section that I want to add the sound into, but also it signals that that section is about to end, and it helps to kind of push the track forward as well. So without it, so here we go, we have our drop, it's almost done. And again, it just kind of shows up. It doesn't really signal that anything is coming to an end. And so if I add it back in, it just really helps to move the track forward and just adds that extra bit of energy. All right, so you heard it already, but using fills such as snare fills or drum fills or even vocal fills, any type of fill is nice. It kind of just makes for a nice contrast and kind of signals, you know, that a change is about to happen. So again, here I have the snare fill. And then we go into the next section. Now I also have this vocal here, and this also can work well too for like transition points. So here is a better example in this build where it transitions into the drop with the vocal. And so that also is great too. Plus it gives, you know, the listener something to attach to. They can sing along or hum along or whatever it might be. Additionally, you can do like a synth fill like what I have here. Just a nice little contrast to the main melody that you have going on in your song. And so this is a nice kind of call and response, if you will. All right, next we're going to talk about cutting out elements when these transitional phrases happen and allowing the elements in the phrase to go and kind of take over and lead. It's kind of like passing off the torch to this transitional section, and then the transitional section will pass the torch back to the main idea. And so you can have some of the elements kind of bleed over, but it's always nice to kind of have it all just clear out in terms of the main elements to allow for the transitional phrase to do its job. So here in this drop, I've taken out these hi-hats and this last kick. I still have the clap just to kind of keep the beat going. And outside of that, you know, there's these other phrases that are like repeating instead of it doing this same melody here in the actual synth. So the synth line sounds like this. And then in this phrase here, I just had it repeat. And it's all together. I got money. It just is a slight switch up, you know, versus if I were to go and have all these other drums in here and keep the original synth phrase, if I went ahead and copied that back in. It just feels like the song is trying to keep staying in the same direction, but by cutting out some of these elements, it just allows for kind of like this like organic switch. And additionally, we were also talking about silence too, so I could go and take out these vocals here and just have nothing happen on the last downbeat except for a clap. And it kind of makes that next initial impact just hit much more harder because there's nothing on that downbeat. So it just like comes back in with full force again because your ear is given like a break when that silence happens. Next, we're going to talk about automation. And what I mean by automation is by manipulating plugin parameters over time to naturally change things. So here in this build section, I have this synth that's being filtered in, and you can see that there's a low pass filter right here on it. And so if I solo it, the element is slowly getting introduced, whereas if I didn't have the filter on it, it would just kind of come in. So in context, if I were to have this transitional fill right here and it goes into this build section, I got money. It kind of just shows up. There's no like gradual lead in, kind of like what I mentioned before. You want elements to gradually lead into each other rather than showing up unless specifically you want that element to show up right away. So in this context, you're kind of introducing the main drop melody. And so by using a filter on it, I got money. It just feels much more organic and it flows with the track better versus just having it just come out of nowhere. Outside of that, in this build, there's also automation happening on other parameters, mainly on the master, which is I have this utility plugin, which is turning the gain down, which is the overall volume of the track itself. So in this build, the volume's going down about 2.5 dB. And then at the fill section here, which is like the pre-drop fill or vocal, whatever you want to call it, then it goes back to full volume. And so that way it feels like the drop is hitting harder than it actually is. Additionally, there is this device here that I'm using, which has quite a lot built into it. You can grab it for free, and it has a high pass filter, a reverb, and it's also cutting out the lows in the EQ, and also has a bit of delay, and it's also compressing everything super hard. So this is what's kind of washing everything out to make it really thin and kind of creating this wall of sound. So if you listen, and you see this ramp right here. And so additionally, all that is kind of making this riser-ish sounding effect happen. But additionally, by using a riser, it just adds to that energy that's being implemented by it washing everything out and making this wall of sound. So you can go and do this without that device. I have here this EQ that's taking out the lows in the synth itself and also clearing out the bass. So that way there is no bass. So that way when it does come back into the drop section, it's hitting a lot more harder. Next, we're going to talk about reversing sounds. And reversing sounds is a good way to kind of intro new elements when they're coming in instead of them just showing up. So again, here I have this synth. I went ahead and took the filter off. And so if I were to go ahead and just reverse the sound into the main synth line, it still works as a great way to kind of intro that sound. So if you listen here, it still works great. And so all I did is I took this synth sample here and I just went and hold down Control, or you can hold down Option, I believe, on Mac, and you just highlight it, hit the R key, and it will reverse the sound. And then you just kind of line it up, and you can use these faders here to kind of have it just fade in, and it sounds really nice. You can also do the same thing with vocals if you want to go and introduce a vocal. Instead of it just showing up and just coming in a nice creative way, it's just doing a reverse reverb tail. And so I'll show you how I did that here. I got money. So all I did is I just took this first part of the vocal and I just went ahead and turned everything else off. And how I did that is I just highlighted that and just hit the 0 key. It will temporarily turn it off. And then I have this reverb here, which is a long tail, something that's built inside of Ableton. And I just put it on the vocal, and then you just solo the vocal channel, and you just solo the channel that you want to record to. You arm the channel and choose resampling from here. And then you just hit the record button. And it'll make a big reverb, and then you just once again hit the R key to reverse it, bring up the volume a little bit, and you can kind of cut off this tail here and you just drop it right there. And I'll turn this vocal back on and I turn off this reverb, and then I got a nice reverb tail for my vocal. I got money, 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 money. Sounds great. Works great as transitional effects as well. Even if you don't want the vocal here, I could just have this effect like this. Great transitional effects in general. You can also do the same thing with drums too. So here I have my reverse kick, and all I did was just take this kick sample and I copied it over and just pasted it here. And then once again, you just hit the R key to reverse it. And I took a little bit of the tail off because when they overlap, it kind of sounds a little messy. So something like that. And then I just turned the volume down on it. And you have a nice reverse kick to intro your kick. And I did that just because this is the first and kind of only kick in these first two sections here. It just is a creative way to introduce elements that might not show up right away in the song. All right, so we're at the sixth and final tip for this video. And like I said, it's kind of a bonus tip because it's not necessarily essential, but it's definitely very effective. And so what that is doing fake outs on the downbeat. Now, what is a downbeat? Well, my kind of definition for it is just this right here. It's just this first beat on your like 4 or 8 bar section. So it's just like the first initial hit on your loop. And so by going and cutting out sounds on this downbeat, or this first beat, if you will, then you can go and kind of get creative with effects or other sounds, and then leaning back into either your snare or your clap by just having sounds like suck you back into that. It just makes that clap or impact just hit that much harder. So typically, you know, there would be these synths here and everything, and these effects would all be turned off just as like a normal kind of loop, if you will. So it would sound like this. But if I were to go and turn all of these off and turn these effects back on that I have here, it would instead sound like this. So as you can see there, it kind of just like adds a bit more energy. It also sucks you back into the beat instead of it just kind of going with the flow. You know, there's nothing really that's like pushing it forward. But when you have, you know, your transition phrase and then it goes into a downbeat like this, all together, it just really makes the whole entire section special. And it's just a nice contrast to your overall idea. So in context of everything, it sounds like this. And so all I did is I went ahead and tried playing around with this clap and reversing it, but the transient was a little bit too short, as you can see here. And so what I did instead is just did the reverse reverb trick and just recorded that, reversed this reverbed out clap, and that worked nicely. I also got this other sound here, and all I did is this little ramp here on this reverb. As you can see, it's just a little reverb ramp, and so that's super effective for just having a dry sound and then making a really wet reverb to where it just feels like the sound's getting really big before it cuts off. So it sounds like this. And so combined with that and also the other reverb tail that I got from the clap, all combined, it just makes it feel just more energetic. All right, y'all, that's it from me. I hope you found this video helpful. If you like the sounds that were used in today's video, most of them come from the Unison Essential Sound Packs. You can find a link below where you can grab all of them for free. Please consider subscribing to Unison, leave a like on the video, and drop a comment below if you have any other transition ideas that you might use. Thanks so much, and we'll see you next time.